What's that, new music?
Hey, I don't choose it. Our producing team does, I guess. So I just hit a button, and whatever comes out comes out. So
right. Okay, I like it.
Family Matters, Kevin Petersen, the one and only, where every week we try to stump Kevin and make him speechless. We have not done it yet, so we're going to keep going. So welcome to another week.
You're going to have to go long and hard to make me make me speechless, but I think the goal is more along the lines of trying to find an answer to a question. So
well, how are you, Kevin? How's Florida?
It's good. Oh my gosh, it's lovely. You and I were hanging out this week a couple years ago.
Oh, at the
Players. Yeah.
We don't have our in at the Players anymore.
Yeah, they're not there. Nobody's there. No comment.
What a beautiful time that was. But anyway, people move on, places, whatever. But
yep.
Well, forever hold in my heart, Kevin, when at TPC Sawgrass. So anyway, Family Matters. We do this every week. We answer questions, ease concerns, dial down anxieties, whatever you want to call it, with anything under the sun: parenting, addiction, substance abuse, substance misuse, codependency, mental health. The list goes on and on. So
bring it. We got it.
Yeah, it's if you're watching live, you can always do a live question. If you're watching a replay, fill in the questions, and we will get to it next week. So I want to talk. There's been a couple of questions, and they're all pertaining to the same thing, and it's relevant in my world as well, with some recent family cases and calls. And so when we're dealing, well, mainly you can go into an offshoot of the marijuana, and it's not your grandpa's THC anymore, but families are at kind of wit's end around. It doesn't have to be their loved one, doesn't have to be a kid, but spouses, whatever, when they're in active psychosis, delusion, and you get those calls where they think the FBI is bugging everything. Families are desperate to try to get them help. How do you what's kind of the first couple of steps when you have that family? I know you've gotten the calls where they're just in this delusional world.
Yeah, totally. And I'll tell you what I get, and this is really pertinent, because what I get is, he was struggling at college, and we brought him home, and now he's sitting in the basement smoking weed, playing video games, and he's got a diagnosis of like social anxiety or bipolar or whatever. And so it's and the thing they always say is it's really not addiction, it's really mental health. And I'm like, okay, I get it. I mean, and I understand that this is not their world. This is all new to them. And I'm not trying to, bully them, but it's okay. Then maybe it's both, so let's set up a simple plan of telling let's just say it's a son, 20-year-old son who's flunked out of college. Not that I would know anything about that,
No comment either on this end. So
yeah, right. Two Rhodes Scholars right here. And what I tell them is, look, let's do this. Let's set some boundaries with the family, with your loved one, and say, moving forward, we're going to set some new rules. We're going to drug test you and breathalyze you to make sure you're not drinking. Number one. And we're going to do that on a regular basis. It doesn't have to be a surprise. It's just going to be regular. And there's plenty of ways to do that. You can hire someone to do that. You can take them to the local, facility that'll handle that. There are things like Sober Links. You can do it online. There's all sorts of ways to handle that. And it's critical that we do two things. One, yes, we want positive, negative, but we also want levels. So we need to know how much. That's number one. Number two, if they're going to come home and live at home or wherever they're living, it doesn't matter. They got to live in a world of self-supporting environment. So if they're going to school, they got to go to school and they got to get good grades. I mean, that's the nature of going to school, right? I remember people that I'm like, well, he gets C's and D's, and and it costs $75,000 a year, but at least he's in school. I'm like, okay. I've done school drunk and high, and I've done school sober. It turns out when you do school sober, you can get A's really easy, And so that's boundary number 2 is you got to be either financially self-supporting or you got to be going to school or a combo pack, right? And as long as the sobriety is met and the schooling or the working thing is happening, and then the third thing is you got to be taking care of yourself, right? You've got to be going to therapy, psychiatry, maybe some 12-step meetings, to the gym. You can't just be hiding out in the basement doing nothing. Now, one of 2 things is going to happen. The person's going to be like, I'm not doing this. F you, how dare you? So then we go to plan B. Plan B is we start talking about intervention and we start talking about treatment centers because they're telling you that the addiction is winning. That's not them talking. That's their addiction talking.
Sure.
And then, but if they're willing to try, then we get them a therapist, we get them a psychiatrist, we get them some help, some meetings, maybe a sober coach, someone like you that does that sort of thing. And we offer them support. We're not going to punish them into good behavior because that never works. What we're going to do is support them. But if they choose against it, then we're going to go to plan B and offer them a solution. And that's more your territory than mine of how do you offer, because the next thing they're going to say is, well, he won't go to treatment. So here's my question back to you, Jay. What do we do when we go to plan B and they say he won't go to treatment before they're even willing to have the intervention?
Well, I mean, it goes what my friend Kevin Petersen and many others have ingrained in me, and I see it firsthand. And it's as simple as if the family doesn't change, the individual is not going to change. And so, I think families don't like hearing that. And so when you get those phone calls, when because I always tell, this treatment is going to be the discover kind of phase of it. And then the recovery really hasn't even started. That 30 days is basically just discover more about himself and his issues. I mean, recovery probably doesn't start for who knows what, but the family's got to respond differently. If they're not going to, if I sense they're not going to, then there's no sense to throw money or down a money pit. So I mean, I think that's the biggest thing is, and many parents think that they have the answers to their loved ones. And reality is, like, the loved one's voice has been muted out for so long. Sometimes they just I've gained some people's trust by just saying, like, hey, I want to hear your voice. I'll have the family all be quiet. I want to hear your side of things. And lo and behold, families haven't had the opportunity to give the loved one a voice. It's just always looking down and punishments and what am I going to do with you? The black sheep and all the roles that families play. Yeah. But I mean, reality, this is why we do it on a weekly basis. And I even learn more, every week. But I mean, baseline is the same. And you are the one that, ingrained in me that if the family doesn't change, the individual is most likely not going to. So
we got a comment.
That's old Scott at Cottonwood, Tucson.
Oh, my man. I love Cottonwood, Tucson. Hey, you just described me as a freshman and sophomore in college. Yeah, well.
So let me ask you this, because you kind of have been on front row with the whole Colorado scene. And we got there was also another question a couple weeks back, and I don't think we ever got to it, but it popped in my head here as what you were talking about. And would you say that there's some false diagnosis going on as, these adolescents and teenagers that are actively using THC?
Yep.
And, lo and behold, like they're going in and getting some psych diagnosis, 16, 17, 18 years old that are staying with them into their early 20s and so forth. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. Funny you should say that. I mean, that's like a daily conversation
Yeah.
I have with the families from Jaywalker, right? Well, we went to his pediatrician, then we went to my doctor, and then we saw a psychologist and the school counselor and a psychiatrist and, the rabbi and the priest and, you know, da 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 da, bipolar, da 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 da, fill in the blank. And I'm like, okay, cool. And here's the thing: you can be both. You can have a mental health diagnosis and struggle with addiction. I think people always feel like it's one or the other. I'm like, no, 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 no. I think it's definitely both. But when you're actively using anything, drugs, alcohol, gambling, food, shopping, sex, you pick it, porn, your behavior is not your true self. So that's why, again, that's why Jaywalker does 90 days, because we need 90 days to get someone's assessment and figure them out and sort through everything and watch them and, get them completely clean and sober. And then, get them through the detox period and get them to, a month sober is great, but we're not diagnosing anybody in a month. Once we get closer to 60 days, 90 days, and ultimately our program is really more of a 9-month, a year-long program. We can really start digging in and saying, okay, so we're noticing these tendencies and how this works and who you are and what you got going on. Okay, I get it. Let's look at this and let's take a look at that and let's get rid of the substance abuse and give you a solution for that. That may diminish everything. I mean, you and I both know that the massive number of people that have come to 12-step world, that once they get sober and start working the steps, a lot, I'm not saying all, a lot of their symptoms magically disappear. I mean, I can't begin to tell you the number of people that are like, oh, dude, I've been diagnosed borderline, bipolar, narcissistic, obstinate, OCD. And then I got sober, started working the steps, and all of a sudden it was like, do we all have some tendencies? Sure. Everybody does. But I mean, that makes a huge difference. But in a family who's got an adolescent, who is being thrown through the mill, right? What I would say is you got to get them to a space where they're completely sober for at least 90 days, preferably 6 months. And then you can have the people they're working with get the true idea of who they are and what they are. And that's really how it works. And again, it doesn't have to be one or the other. It can be both. What I always tell people is when someone has mental health issues and they're self-medicating, which I totally get, that doesn't make them an addict or an alcoholic. But when we tell them it's time to sober up and we start to support them in that process, if they can't, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, I get it. You're suffering from some mental health stuff. And it looks like you can't stop using. And so, but not everybody that has mental health issues is an addict, and so it's kind of a tricky thing, right? But that's why it takes time. That's why a 30-day program, I mean, I get it. That's what your insurance will pay for, but that's not going to give you the results you're looking for.
So reality is you can't really diagnose psych if you're using substances. I mean, so you're going to have to clear the system of substances before getting an app, and I think that's where these adolescents are going in, and they're not, most people are not looking at the substance use before diagnosing, and they're just kind of writing these big words, these very heavy psych words on, diagnosis on papers, and sticking with these kids for God knows wherever. And the family, more often than not doesn't know how to deal with it and so forth. So yeah, it starts with substance abuse, and everyone wants to know if it's psych or substance. And I always tell them what you said, like, you can't get a look at the psych unless you deal with the substances. So
yeah, and yeah, I mean, let's be honest. I mean, every 14, 16, 18-year-old boy that I've ever met can be slapped a diagnosis, whether they're using substances or not. I mean, most of them are just knuckleheads, and not bad guys, but just, there's puberty, hormones, just all sorts of stuff cooking and going on. And, Yeah, by all means. I mean, and yeah, and again, I also don't really fault all the medical or psychological professionals, because most of them don't know very much about addiction, and they don't get it. They really don't get it. They're taught to look at, what's on the surface. Oh, okay, I see these 5 behaviors. I go to the DSM. Boom, you qualify. You know, and that's where we're headed. It's like, oh, okay, but did you look for this, this, and this? Well, that's not what they're trained for. So, I
Is
get
there
it.
something? Is there something families can kind of take a look at with when they're dealing with that issue and not necessarily falling in as are you looking at more kind of a you know uh, dual diagnosis? I mean, I get in these framework, but addiction specialist, or what would families look for if they had a 16 or 17-year-old that's obviously suspected maybe heavy, some THC and is showing some psych, like they're probably just going to go to the nearest, Google or wherever their insurance company is going to drive them to. But is there certain aspects to people that we're looking for families?
I would look for a licensed therapist who's also a licensed addiction therapist, because they're going to have the dual thing there. And, they're going to be able to say, oh, I definitely see the behaviors, but let's be clear, until we get rid of the substances, we don't know if that's an anomaly or it's being, exponential because of the use. You want someone that has training in both. I think would be the number one thing I would say. And you're going to have a tough time finding a psychiatrist that has trained. I mean, they're there and they're wonderful, they're amazing, but that doesn't, that's going to be a tough one. But if wherever you are, you can Google, therapist / addiction, licensed, and let's make sure they're a licensed therapist and they're licensed in the addiction world as well. Because we definitely want someone that understands the process and has spent a lot years in college or in grad school and understands what the heck they're doing. So yeah, that's how I would roll with it.
Well, it's I mean, there's also a question around, I mean, I think we touched on it, but just kind of the reality of the rise in kind of these synthetics, whatever it may be, and even THC, the extremely high levels that we're dealing with THC now is driving people into kind of delusional and psychosis and so forth. And, families, spouses, everyone's kind of getting in fear. And I think it's interesting. Is there a certain, is there a certain kind of withdrawal kind of synopsis or program or overview when dealing with heavy THC synthetics, kind of these delusions,
Sure. No, totally. I would tell you it generally takes about 30 days from what I've witnessed, the people that I've worked with that come in who are experiencing, cannabis-induced psychosis. And I mean, it really takes 30 days to 6 weeks before, not that they're all better, but before they're kind of out of that cloud and more on, and again, those people look like they're, schizophrenic, and they look like a couple of dozen other things, So it's you got to get everything out of their system in a contained environment where they're being watched and engaged and participated with, and someone's recording their interactions with them, and then you can go forward. Then you can.
God bless our brains. I mean, with all those chemicals and so forth like that. And I think you're just talking about, I mean, the 30 days, so forth. So many of these people are doing 2-4 day detoxes and coming right back to home and expecting it, different things to change. Like you're basically talking, it takes minimum 30 days. I mean, and God bless our brains. The more and more I talk about it, I mean, what we put our brains and our bodies through, God, I mean, I'm shocked my brain just didn't shut down one day.
Oh my Lord Almighty! It's funny. We were doing a family weekend last weekend at Jaywalker, and some of the parents were asking some of these questions, like, so like kind of like, what have you seen in the changes in the industry? And I said, well, here's the deal. When I got sober in 1991, the majority of the people were doing weed, alcohol, and cocaine. Really, meth and pills, and they hadn't even invented oxys yet at that point, but heroin. But that heroin was the Vietnam vets, and meth was kind of crack. Was way off. There were guys. Don't get me wrong. I had my buddy Mike Krejci was struggled with the crack, but it was very on the margin. And then I said, what's happened over time, right? And the year 2000 came, and all of a sudden, kabam, we had oxys coming through, and it changed everything. And then we had fentanyl, and now we have this massive dose marijuana, and it has completely changed things. Because back in my day, it was definitely you don't need drugs to get off drugs. That's lame. You're not really sober. And I know you've heard that nonsense, and I hate that crap. It just drives me batty. If somebody's truly struggling with some mental health issues, they're gonna need some help. Oh, hey, look who that's Rob Ryberg. That's our new CEO and owner at Jaywalker. But you're also
kiss up.
Oh, shut up. And that's also see, now you completely made me lose my right. You're not sober if you're taking psych meds, and you're not sober if you have to use Suboxone or anything like that. And that's just not true. That's just not true. Nowadays people come in on stuff that is so overwhelmingly powerful and so beyond our scope that they do need that help. They absolutely do need that help. And people that are in AA, that are, or 12-step, whatever, that take psych meds, there's nothing wrong with that. Now, let's be clear. I'm not talking about heavy benzos being stoned all day. I'm talking about SSRIs and that sort of thing. But there are people that have very severe symptoms and very severe trauma, and that may be where they need to go. It's not for us to judge. And it says that in the big book,
Yeah.
And so I think that's really important for us to remember. So.
Well, and just talking about THC, I don't know if anything's changed, but therefore I will say, assuming it hasn't changed, that insurance isn't willing to cover treatment, or if it's THC primary. I don't know if that's changed, but no. I sure hope, if it hasn't changed, I sure hope the dialogue is changing, because like you were talking about and you outlined, this is different. This is a complete different game when it comes to THC, and even around teenagers, and it's not just smoking, joints around a campfire and, whatever, like we once did. It's a true concern for parents. And I hope parents truly understand that doing THC nowadays is a legitimate concern, because it's not just this, weak, joint that you did as a kid. You can go into psychosis after a couple of doses. So,
well, true. And then, let's take it to the next level, right? Because we have young guys coming in that are coming out of homes that, are very prominent and very well-to-do, that are, hitting the fentanyl and hitting the oxys. And, those guys, you can die. That's not it's not like, the old days, right? Where, you drink a bunch of beer, you throw up, you smoke a lot of weed, low level weed, and you just sit there and fall asleep and end up with, a jar of mayonnaise in your hand, and that's over with, man. These guys can die. These guys, it's brutal. It's a whole new world, and it requires a whole different level of treatment.
Yeah. And not just I'm talking specifically in teenagers. I recently have had numerous calls for the last 6 months of high functioning executives that have gotten taken away by the THC, and now we're getting calls from their offices and families and so forth saying like, Jay, I don't know what happened. He used to be like this high performance, lawyer. Now he hasn't even been in the office in 3.5 weeks, and he's blah blah. It's not something to play around with, and no matter the age, and it's old or young, it's there, and I hope we as an industry are all changing along with it, because it's right on our front doorstep per se. So, well, it's been good. We talked specifically around a certain topic, and I think it was a fun topic. So.
Yeah, no, I think this is, and it's super pertinent. It's this is definitely a discussion that I have with the families all the time.
Well, awesome. We'll do this again next week. So keep the questions coming, and if there's a topic we should hit Kevin with, just let us know. But Kevin, I'll see you next week.